Welcome to LEN Performance's Snow Shock installation video. Today we're going to walk you through the installation of our rebuildable high-performance track shocks on a 2017 Ski-Doo 850 MXZ X. First, you need to loosen up the track tension to start the removal process of the skid frame. We recommend doing this on flat ground. Once track tension has been released, you will want to lay the machine over onto its side for easier access to the rear suspension during the removal of the rear skid frame. To ensure that all track tension has been released from the skid frame, use a dead blow hammer to move the tensioner assembly forward. Now you can remove the skid frame by removing the two bolts attaching the rear of the skid frame to the tunnel. Then swing the rear of the skid frame down and away from the tunnel to make the next steps easier. With these 4 skid frame bolts now removed and track tension released, you can now remove skid frame from the machine. Remove the idler wheels on the outside of the skid frame rails to gain access to the bolts attaching the front track shock and tension springs to skid frame. Release pressure on tension springs. These springs will have a lot of pressure on them, so be careful when removing the bolts holding them in place. Now you can start to remove top bolt connecting front track shock to front upper skid frame. Remove lower bolt attaching the shock to skid frame rails. Once both bolts are removed, old shock can be removed from the skid frame. Now you're ready for installing the new front track shock. Make sure to install new shock in the correct orientation for your machine. Reinstall top and bottom bolts that you removed during the removal of the old shock. Make sure to tighten the bolts to OEM factory specifications. To begin the rear track shock removal, start by taking out the lower bolt attaching shock to the skid frame. Now remove the top bolt attaching the rear track shock to skid frame. You can then remove the shock from the skid frame. Now to start the installation of the rear track shock, make sure the new shock is in the correct orientation for your machine. Reinstall the lower bolt attaching shock to the skid frame. Next, reinstall the upper bolt to attach rear shock to skid frame. And again, make sure to tighten both bolts to OEM factory specifications. Reinstall tension springs first and then reattach the idler wheels we removed earlier. Set your fully assembled skid frame into the track and tunnel. Install front tunnel track bolts to reattach skid frame to machine. Next, swing the skid frame back into its position inside of the machine. You may need to compress the skid frame for completion of this step. Once in this position, reinstall both bolts that attach the rear of the skid frame to the tunnel. Set your machine back upright to complete the final steps of the shock installation. Use the track tension adjuster to OEM specifications. Now with LEN Performance shocks installed on your machine, we recommend you taking your machine out for a ride to make the final adjustments to preload to best complement your riding style. For more information about LEN Performance shocks, along with tips on installing our shocks into your machine, please visit us at lenperformance.com.